Uh, a huge week, right? You got a lot
Yes.
going on with the Sacramento Kings. Of course, the Niners are in the NFC Championship game on Sunday. So let's bring in a guy who is so talented. He covers both at an elite level. He's doing a great job with the Sacramento Bee, covering the Sacramento Kings this year. And he's been locked into the Niners for years and years, hosting amazing podcasts with Kyle Madsen, Candlestick Chronicles. Let's welcome him in. He's the one and only Chris Biderman.
Man, you guys are a vibe. I need to up my energy to be part of this show. But no, congratulations to you guys. I'm really happy to be here and man, it's awesome to see you guys killing it in your first week.
Well, I appreciate
Dude,
you being here. Thanks for the love. You don't have to try to match our energy.
Yeah, come on now.
Yeah, you don't.
We're weird.
We are very weird.
We're
Very
all
weird.
right?
Yes, all of us. Yeah, there's just a lot going on this week, and it's interesting. Kings coming off a loss last night, but taking a step back, big picture-wise. You've been around this team a lot this year. The Kings sitting at 27-20. Where are you at with this squad? Do you think that they need to make a major move at the deadline, maybe a subtle tweak? How are you feeling about this Kings roster at this point of the season?
Yeah, I think for me, if I were Monty McNair, I mean, now that he has a contract extension, I do think you can operate with a little bit more clarity, right? Like you can decide whether or not you want to make a move that is about the long term or the short term. For me, I'm less inclined to make a huge move because I do think the Kings are going to have a really hard time maintaining their depth if they do make a big move, because you have to give up something to get something, and Keegan Murray is probably their biggest trade asset. And I don't know that you move on from Keegan Murray. I think it's pretty rare to find a rookie that shoots at the level that he does. So even though there might be somebody out there who could maybe lift your ceiling this season, I think for the long term, given that he's on his rookie contract, he is so young, he's controllable for a while. I just don't know that you make a move to go all in now, sacrificing what could be a very controllable and very useful asset over the long haul. So I'm more inclined to maybe, if I'm running the team, and very, very obviously I'm not, I'm probably doing something around the margins, maybe trying to get a backup center, maybe trying to get another power forward who you might feel comfortable playing small ball center, because we know the Kings love to play with a lot of pace. So, I'm probably not trading Keegan Murray. I'm probably not making a move that really upsets the apple cart in terms of the chemistry this team already has. Mike Brown calling Harrison Barnes irreplaceable this week seems to stand out to me quite a bit. And if you look at it, I mean, in terms of wing depth, it's Keegan Murray and Harrison Barnes and Trey Lyles. And really, that's kind of it. Outside of the backcourt for them. So I don't know that there's a move out there that they can make that would allow them to provide enough of an upgrade this year without sacrificing too much of the long-term potential for this team. So I'm probably sitting tight and maybe looking at maybe the margins, like I said, to add a smaller piece.
No, that makes sense. And one guy you were talking about is Keegan Murray, and I've just been so impressed with him lately. It seems like he's in the best rhythm he has been in the entire season. And even last night, it was an ugly loss. I feel like he stood out to me. The way he's coming off screens, the way he is attacking much more confidently. He's been better. He's still got a ways to go from a rebounding perspective, but that shot release is quick. He's not afraid to get it off if there's a guy on him, or even if he has a little space. It doesn't matter. What's jumped out to you about him as of late?
Yeah, the rebounding is certainly ticking upwards. I think in the right direction. I think his ability to hit shots in from inside the arc has been getting a little bit better. Keegan Murray was hitting like 47% before the last couple of weeks from 2-point range, which is like not a good number, right? Like only Matthew Dellavedova was worse, and Murray was the worst among all rotation players in terms of just percentage in the 2-point area. And Mike Brown, obviously 3-point shooting is probably the most important thing for his offensive arsenal right now, but he's got to be able to finish in the lane. And Mike Brown talked about Keegan needing to get more aggressive and needing to understand that he is maybe stronger and more athletic than he gives himself credit for, and just needs to go up and dunk the ball and be more aggressive. And so I think there has been signs of that recently. I think rebounding is part of that. It takes on a similar sort of mindset. Like, man, you go realize that you're 6'9", 6'10", and you're a strong guy down there. Like I think Mike Brown is hoping to get that out of him. And Mike Brown also said that he thinks Keegan Murray's mid-range game is going to be really, really good as time goes on. So I think, the Kings, obviously, they're one of those teams that prioritizes, looks at the rim and open threes, and maybe less of the mid-range game, which is so common among the NBA these days. But I do think Keegan Murray can be that type of player for them. So, it's going to take some time, but given, like I said, the size, the athleticism, the shooting touch, I think he could potentially be a really good player for the Kings for a really long time. But there are going to be some growing pains like there are for so many NBA players. So I think that's sort of been the story for Keegan Murray this year. And also, we don't really know what's going on with his left thumb, but I have to imagine it makes it a little bit more difficult to finish in the lane when, he said he can't palm the ball with his left hand because of that thumb. So he's probably not finishing with his left hand as much as he would. And maybe that's a reason why the 2-point numbers haven't been maybe what people would expect. But I would expect Keegan Murray to continue to take a steady climb as the season goes.
Yeah, you're seeing him go to the rim with a little bit more authority as since we first saw that thumb wrap to now, we've seen some improvement. But I want to talk a little bit about last night after any loss this season, Chris. It seems like this is a fan base that gets triggered and is like, okay, what's next?
Is it falling apart? Is
what
it
needs
over?
to change? Things are blowing up. You don't know what to do, right? And I think when we really look at this King squad, whenever there's a loss, we go straight to that backup five. We go to that second unit and we go, how do the Kings make this better? Do you have an answer for that right now? If you were to look around the league and go, okay, like we should have our eyes on this guy or this guy, not to say that would be the direction that team would go in, but is there anyone that's really sticking out to you in that position around the league?
I mean, maybe Mason Plumlee, but even then, like I sort of look at the backup center thing. Like I'm not giving up a lot of capital to go get a backup center. Like I certainly wouldn't give up a guy who's like a key piece of the rotation just so you feel better about the backup center spot. Because look, if and when the Kings make the playoffs, their backup center is going to be playing about, 6 minutes a game, right? So like, how much are you going to sacrifice for a guy that's playing 6 minutes where, you can try Chimezie Metu, who's been good in spurts. I know he's coming off the knee injury now. I would be inclined to try Trey Lyles at backup center and, maybe go smaller, play Harrison Barnes, Keegan Murray, Kevin Huerter, Malik Monk, or Davion Mitchell with De'Aaron Fox. Like there are lineups that I think haven't really been tried by Mike Brown that might be effective with that second unit. But in terms of like, the Kings losing some of these games and the fan base being upset, I think the Kings, it speaks to the fact that the Kings are winning games and they've raised the standard, right? Like coming into the year, I don't know about you guys, but for myself, I was like, yeah, if they make the play-in, that's a pretty good outcome to the season.
Same.
If they make the playoffs, obviously that's a really good outcome. And now they're the 3 seed more than halfway through the season. You're like, all right, well, is home court advantage on the table here? I think that's a question that certainly, we can ask now. I think it would have felt silly asking that question in September, but given what we've seen from this team, how good they can be offensively, I think, a top 4 seed is not out of the realm of possibility. I would still probably bet against it, but certainly a top 6 seed and being out of the play-in is certainly achievable for this team. I think it comes down to just maturity and being able to bring that intensity game in and game out and avoid some of those, dog days of the season, some of that malaise that this team has gone through. And as good as they've been, they've been one of the best teams on the road in the Western Conference. But to lose games like last night and against Washington and Charlotte and Atlanta, like a lot of sub 500 teams have come to Golden One Center and won games. And I don't know that necessarily speaks to the roster more so than it speaks to them just maybe taking their foot off the gas and, not playing weak side defense as strong as they need to, not attacking the paint with the same intensity that they need to, and trying to settle for too many, outside shots. Like, I just think they need to keep their foot on the gas with more consistency. And that's pretty much what they've been saying. I don't know, that they lost last night because they didn't have that they need to go add a piece on the roster. I think, when you talk about adding a piece, it's about trying to compete with, Denver, Memphis, when everyone's playing their full team. Like when you talk about adding a piece, that's what you're talking about, is competing with those teams, not avoiding the losses to teams you're already better than, right? So I just think that there's a maturity that the team needs to find as it continues to gain its footing as a winning team. They're still new to it, but I don't know that losing some of these games, like I said, is because the roster isn't good enough. I think the roster is good enough for them to avoid these trap games. I think they just need to keep their foot on the gas a little bit more.
You and Deuce are really optimistic.
Oh,
people.
we'll see though. We'll see.
No, because you heard Chris.
Yeah.
He was just talking about 3-4 in the Western Conference.
He said he wouldn't bet on that,
and he wouldn't bet on it. He said closer to 6, and that to me is more realistic. But my thing that I keep challenging Deuce on. And Chris, I'm going to challenge you as well, because you talk about
watch out.
Here I come for you, Chris. Their high power offense, and you guys tell me if I'm wrong. These teams have now seen this high powered offense. Not to say that everyone can stop it just because they have film on it. And, you're just sometimes not going to have the right pieces. But when you have the right strategy to slow down a team that maybe has a high pace offense, or slow down a team that has a passing big, or wherever it may be, there's smart teams in the NBA that are going to make their adjustments to slow down this team. And I think there's smart teams in the Western Conference. And that's where some of my bigger fears come from, and where I keep on putting the Kings lower and lower. My expectations go lower and lower for this squad. Does that ever worry you? But
we are 47 games into an NBA season. The Kings are still the number 1 scoring team in the league. Last night was the second time this year they've been held under 100 points.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen. I mean, not every team is like the Raptors that have all these guys who are rangy 6'6" to 6'9", who are long with 7-foot wingspans. That was a bad matchup. And it's bad matchup. The Kings didn't play their game. It was an ugly loss. I'm not trying to excuse it at all, but I don't last night's loss doesn't make me hit the panic button at all.
No,
Chris.
Yeah. So I when it comes to scouting the Kings offense, I think one thing, when the Kings offense is going really well, they're cutting really hard, right? They're screening really well, and they sort of have reactions to, anything a defense is throwing at it. And it's less about schematics and more of the intensity that they're playing with. Right. So I think, a big question for me is what's it going to look like in the playoffs? Is the game obviously slows down, right? Possessions are more intense. It's going to be a lot more one-on-one play probably, but they're still going to try to maintain that balance of playing with pace and playing with that same force when it comes to, cutting really hard or setting good screens and doing all that. So it's, a lot of teams like the Warriors run a very similar brand of offense, right? And it's less about schematics and more about just having guys who are really good offensive players, guys who are good decision makers, good cutters, good passers, all of that stuff. And I think the Kings do have that, and that can make them, I don't want to say scheme proof, but I think to Deuce's point, it's going to be more about matchups where, last night, as an example, the length that the Raptors have, that's potentially problematic. And maybe against, if they match up with whoever it is, if it's Memphis in a playoff series, given how good they are defensively, maybe that's going to be a tough matchup for them. But no, I just think the way they play offense when they're going, they're playing so fast, and they're cutting really hard, and they're making crisp passes, and it's all about timing, right? Even if, they cut back door and somebody anticipates them cutting back door, then they can still pop out to the 3-point line, right? And then have guys there who are open. So it's there are different things they can do to sort of combat what teams do defensively from a schematic standpoint that I'm confident about the Kings being able to score. What I'm less sure about is their ability to defend. And it's just they have to defend. And one thing that's interesting is their starting lineup when Davion Mitchell is in there for De'Aaron Fox. So when it's the 4 starters with Mitchell, they have a 100.7 defensive rating, which would be best in the league, right? which is kind of interesting. Obviously, you're not going to bench De'Aaron Fox because he's been arguably the best clutch player in the league, just in terms of scoring late in games. But like, that's notable to me. Like the Kings, who struggle so much defensively, when their second most used lineup with Davion Mitchell in place of Fox with the starters has a 107 rating defensively at this point in the season, that makes me think like there's potential here for the Kings to be a better defensive team. But obviously, you can't play that lineup as often as you like because Fox is so important to them late in games and given what he does offensively.
This road trip coming up, I said, 7-game trip. There's not a ton of good teams on this, right? You get San Antonio, Indiana, you get Minnesota twice, Houston twice. What are your expectations for it? I think they could win 5 games on this road trip. Come back 5-2. Is that crazy?
No, I think you're right. And like, it's funny, if you look at, like, if this were to be the schedule at home, like if they were to have these 7 games at home, I would feel less confident about it given the way they play against under 500 teams at home, right? Like there's a little bit more intensity you bring when you're going into a road arena versus, oh, we're just hosting, the Houston Rockets or whatever. Like, we don't need to bring it. Well, the crowd will give us energy. Like they don't have that luxury when they go on the road. So I tend to think they're going to play better against these sub 500 teams on the road than they would at Golden One Center. So I'm with you. I think, they should finish 5-2. I mean, realistically, or maybe not realistically, but they're good enough to the point where it's like, man, they should rattle off like 5-2, 6-1 on this trip. Like that wouldn't be crazy. And like, there aren't, like San Antonio is tanking, right? Houston is tanking. That's 3 games right there. Minnesota has been mostly a dumpster fire throughout the season. Like they should at least split in Minnesota. So Indiana potentially tough, but like I'm with you. Like if they come out of this 7-game trip with fewer than 5 wins, I would consider it a disappointment because, this team is the number 3 team in the West right now. And they've just raised the bar throughout the season of what the expectations should be. And these are teams that they should absolutely beat. And if they don't, we're going to look back, come April, if they're not, a top 4 seed, we're going to look at these games against teams that they should have beaten, probably more so than the games against the elite teams in the Western Conference in terms of like where the Kings' record's at, because they're going to be, there are a handful of games already where it's like, man, they should have won those, and those might come back to bite them.
I appreciate your guys' optimism. I truly do. But I want to transition into some 49ers.
Oh, not just some 49ers.
Some 49ers.
The NFC Championship
The
game.
NFC Championship. Sure. Because we talk about expectations, and we've seen what Brock Purdy can do with this 49er squad. Last game, if anything, we're talking about that game being one of those games where we notice his rookie moments for the first time, right? What are some of your expectations for Brock Purdy and the 49ers going into this one?
This is going to be the toughest test that they've had. And I don't think it's particularly close. I think, like, if you're defending the 49ers, I think the Cowboys did a really good job of this, right? Like you win the line of scrimmage by your defensive tackles preventing the guards and centers from getting to the second level in the running game. And if the 49ers can't run the ball, their play action is going to be less effective. And play action is a huge part of their passing game. And so Dallas did a really good job of stopping the run. And in coverage, they weren't biting on play action. There weren't the guys running open through the middle of the field like we see so often against Kyle Shanahan offenses. So I would imagine that the Eagles are going to look close at what Dallas did defensively in terms of slowing down the running game and play action, which did make it a lot more difficult on Brock Purdy. But, to Purdy's credit, he still didn't turn the ball over. And that's something that Kyle Shanahan talks a lot about when praising Brock Purdy. He said recently that, that's one of his best traits is the fact that Purdy just doesn't turn the ball over. And when you're a team that, prioritizes defense in the running game, that's really what you want from your quarterback. But at the same time, like that sort of screams, game manager, right? But Brock Purdy has proven to be a little bit more than a game manager. He can make plays outside the structure of the offense. And as much as the offense might have struggled throughout the game against Dallas, they still converted half their third downs, which is about where you want to be, right? Like if you're converting 50% of your third downs throughout the season, you're going to be one of the best third down teams in the league. So they obviously want to be better in the red zone. They were 1 of 3 in the red zone against the Cowboys. It's going to be really tough because the Eagles defense is really good. That pass rush that the Eagles have might be the best that we've seen like in recent memory, like full stop. Like even, they've 70 sacks, I think it was, and they had 4 guys in double figures. In 2019, the Niners had, as good as their pass rush was, they had 1 guy in double figures in sacks, and that was, Sacramento's Eric Armstead. So it's going to be a really difficult game. I think if you're looking at, resumes and looking at both these teams on paper, I think the matchup favors the Eagles. They've been the best team in the NFC throughout the season. They probably have the best offensive line in the league. You can make a case they have the best defensive line in the league. They just have a loaded roster without any real weaknesses. But I think the 49ers have a pretty substantial intangible advantage, right? This is a team that's 6-2 in the playoffs under Kyle Shanahan, or 7-2, 7-6, one of the two. They have a lot of playoff experience. Let's put it that way. And they won road games in the playoffs last year. They went to Green Bay, obviously, and won that game. They went to Dallas and won that game. So, this is one thing that was interesting being at the game on Sunday was like, just the seriousness in which the 49ers sort of approached the game. Like being in Green Bay last year and talking to players after the game, there was sort of a celebratory nature to that win. Like everybody was really fired up. They just won in Lambeau. And after the Cowboys game, it was kind of like, all right, we know we just won a great game and we're going to the NFC Championship game and the 3rd time in 4 years. But there was a seriousness of like, all right, we have to buckle down because we know this next game is probably going to be the toughest test really this group has faced since going against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, I would say. So there's just an element of like, this is a veteran group that's played a ton of playoff games together at this point. They've won a lot of playoff games. And I think that's the advantage the 49ers have. Like being a veteran group that's also sort of the underdog, I think is a good place for this 49ers group to be. But the big question is Brock Purdy going to turn into a pumpkin at some point, or is this going to continue? I know they're very confident in Brock Purdy. The fact that he hasn't turned the ball over yet in the playoffs has been a big reason why the 49ers have advanced this far. But can that continue against the best pass rush in the league on the road in the cold? That's a different question. And I, fortunately we'll get to see. We'll have our answer on Sunday.
I can't wait for that game. It's going to be a lot of fun. Chris, seriously, thank you so much for spending some time with us. We'll do it again soon, man. We appreciate you.
No problem at all. I'll see you guys back at Golden One Center.
Absolutely. The one and only Chris Biderman.
He's so